Hi, welcome to Universal Interiors. This is Les Ingolstead along with my friend Raina Zima, and we are, for our third week, enjoying a book named Imagine Heaven, and we're interviewing John Burke, and we are so excited to get back to this with you. If you have missed any of that, please go to lakestv3.com and you can catch up on any of the shows for that matter, and enjoy the show today. Again, we're the third part with John Burke, and I am so excited for you to learn a little bit more what heaven will be like.
Another thing that kind of really affected me is I'm such a visual person, and I kind of had this vision of heaven like we're bouncing around on clouds. That's totally not the case, is it?
No. And that is what I find, is that people have such a horrible view of heaven, and that's why they don't want to think about it, and and it's why many people run away from God too. They're afraid. They're afraid of what they don't know. And just the opposite is true. So when some of the commonalities, when people commonly die, they leave their bodies, but they still have a body, and then they're in the vicinity of the room for a while, and they can tell things that then we've been able to corroborate, like, well, that's really what happened. That's really what the instruments look like. That's really what the people were doing. Then many times they're greeted by people who have passed before them, relatives, family members, or friends who were deceased. And so there's kind of like this welcoming committee. Don Piper, who was a pastor who was run over by an 18-wheeler, he talks about this welcoming committee that comes rushing toward him, and they're just exploding with joy. Dr. Mary Neal, who was a spine surgeon who died in a kayak accident, she said how they were people bursting with light, but the light was love, and they know the people. It's our family, our friends who have died before us. Those relationships don't end. The memories, the connection, it doesn't get less, it gets deeper. And it's just as physical. In fact, they talk about how the hugs are hugs like you can't even imagine experiencing in this life. It's so much deeper. And people then often will go through what they'll call a tunnel or a pathway. Oftentimes it's like a dark tunnel, and there's light at the end, or a pathway through the darkness that's lit up. And I kind of I question in the book, science now tells us that we can't reconcile quantum physics of the micro and general relativity of the macro unless there are at least 5 dimensions. Some posit 11 dimensions that we can't see to our reality. And so maybe that's this wormhole from our dimensionality into God's greater dimensionality. But they go through this tunnel and they find themselves many times in this beautiful place, and not unlike the beauty of earth. So grass and trees and flowers and animals and mountains and streams and beauty, like just like you would love to see on earth, and yet way more vibrant. So they talk about the light, they talk about the colors, and how there are colors that our color spectrum doesn't have. And they struggle, and that's why I included so many stories, because they struggle to get the words to describe the beauty. But when you hear many of them struggling with the words, you start to get a picture, and you just start to realize this is unbelievable. And you know what's fascinating as well? Is blind people who have near-death experiences see the same thing. Now that I find fascinating. And in Imagine Heaven, I report on 3 blind people who talk about seeing the same thing that this doctor and this TWA airline pilot saw in heaven.
Yeah, I actually had that, like Vicky was one of them. I mean, there's so many I just kept writing down. I was just so fascinated by that. Like you said, blind people that could account and tell, and they've never seen things on earth. Or how about the kids? I mean, those things.
I think that is corroborative evidence that there's something real and true going on here. This is not just hallucination. This is not just the effects of drugs. It couldn't be. Can I read you a story from
Oh, we
Brad?
love that.
Kid?
Yes.
So Brad was 8 years old. He lived in the Boston Center for the Blind when he had a cardiac arrest. And he leaves his body, and for the first time he can see. He can see the room. He can see his blind roommate, who realizes that Brad is struggling, gets up and stumbles to the door and leaves and goes down the hall to get help. And Brad was later able to say, I saw him do that, even though he was out cold from this heart attack. Well, Brad then talks about how he entered what he began to wonder if it was darkness. He said, because there was no color whatsoever. And he's talking about going through this tunnel. And he didn't even know how to describe darkness, except there was color and then there was no color. And he comes out into this large field, this immense field. He noticed huge palm trees with enormous leaves and tall grass. And here's what he said. I was walking up this field. It seemed as if I was so exhilarated, so unbelievably renewed, I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay forever where I was. There's just no way to describe the peace and the tranquility. And that's common as well. All those words are common. Then he says the weather was absolutely perfect in terms of temperature and humidity. So fresh, so unbelievably fresh that mountain air on earth couldn't even come close, which is fascinating because a blind person would notice temperature and humidity, way more than a sighted person. Now, here, listen to what he says about the light, because this is a clue. There was tremendous light up there. It seemed to come from every direction. It was all around and everywhere that I happened to be looking. It seemed like everything, even the grass I was stepping on, seemed to soak in that light. It seemed like the light could actually penetrate through everything, even the leaves on the trees. There was no shade. There was no need for shade. And the light was all-encompassing. Yet I wondered how I could know that because I had never seen before that point. I felt like I wouldn't understand it had it happened on earth, but where I was able to accept it almost immediately. Now, here's the wild thing. So Brad, in his story, he continues to talk about walking up this hill to this giant wall that looked like a wall almost of like gemstones, and the light was coming out of them. And then he goes through this entrance way into this, he's heading into this city when an angel stops him and says, it's not your time, you have to go back. Now, I correlate that with what Mary Neal, who is a spine surgeon, says about coming up to the same wall and going into the same entrance of the city. Dale Black, who is a TWA airline pilot, coming up, flying in the same city, seeing the same grass and the same wall, and talking about the same light that comes out of everything. Now, here's the wild thing. Why would these people, like a TWA airline pilot and a spine surgeon, make this up and be saying the same thing as a blind person and be talking about this light? Like here's how Dale describes it. So he's coming in, he's seeing this city. I was fast approaching a magnificent city. Again, this is a TWA airline pilot. Golden and gleaming among a myriad of resplendent colors. The light was the purest I'd ever seen. The music, the most majestic, enchanting, glorious I'd ever heard. I knew this place was entirely and utterly holy, and I was overwhelmed by its beauty. And then he says, the light didn't make me squint. He said it was brighter than the sun, but it didn't make me squint. All I wanted to do was look at it. And somehow I knew the light was life and love, and they were all connected and interrelated. Remarkably, the light didn't shine on things, but through them, through the grass, through the trees, through the wall, through the people who were gathered there.
Beautiful.
Now, here's the thing. Brad, how would he ever have heard that? And Vicky, another blind person, talks about seeing light coming out of Jesus' beard. Why would they ever on earth get the idea that light comes out of things? Because it shines on things on earth, right? But John in the book of Revelation talks about how there is no sun or moon in heaven, for God is its light. And the Lamb is its lamp, he says. And the nations will walk in that light. And God says he is love, and the light and the love are what are coming out of everything. And so it's exactly what John says in the book of Revelation. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So it's like all these things, like they come together in this amazing, beautiful picture of a life that we've only craved and that we yearn for, but we don't even know what we're yearning for.
I mean, how cool is it that this place is going to be that amazing that people don't want to leave when they get there, or, you know, they don't want to come back.
Exactly.
I mean, that gives me hope that this is a really great place. And I mean, when you're talking about just that overwhelming feeling of love that people are getting from the light,
Right.
I just think that's great.
It's really unfathomable. We can hardly even enter into that idea. I don't think as he mentioned, people have just such a crazy view on heaven. They're scared of it, or they fear it, or whatever they might be imagining, or God too. Some of these is just like it keeps you away because you don't understand. That's what's so exciting about doing this interview and this discussion and just having opportunity. As you just learned about all the different people, especially think about it, those that were born blind, and we get these amazing stories from him as he's sharing this, and always talking about the light. Blind people, out of darkness into light. That is incredible. That holds me really captive, to be honest. And God is light. That's one of the things our biblical God tells us, that he is light, he is love, he's pure in the form. And when you think about it, as they said, you know, honestly, we crave sunshine. We love to feel the warmth, the hug of the sun. That is exactly what our God is telling us about light of heaven. He is drawing us near. They don't want to leave. We crave it. So we don't want to be in the darkness, and I think
And we can fly.
Yes, there's a
That's my, that was my great thing.
Sure.
So I'm like, yes, we can fly.
And there's going to be much more details ahead in this book and along with us. So please stay tuned, and remember, we do crave this life. It's what we're made for. We yearn for a great hope that God gives us. Now, join us next week, and we're going to learn a little bit more about Imagine Heaven. Thanks so much.